I never thought I'd be starting over at 35, but here I am, Dr. Tessa Thompson, dentist and soon-to-be business owner. It's been 3 years since I married Mike, a mechanical engineer, 5 years my senior. We live in my apartment. He says he left his to his ex-wife after their divorce. I don't know much about that part of his life, and I've never pushed. Our life together has been good, for the most part. I make a comfortable living as a dentist, but I've always dreamed of more. That's why I've been squirreling away every extra penny, denying myself little luxuries. My goal? Opening my own private practice. You should do it, Tessa, Mike said one evening as we sat on our worn couch, the TV droning in the background. You'd be great at running your own business. I looked at him, surprised by his enthusiasm. You really think so? He nodded, taking a swig of his beer. Absolutely. My wife, the business owner. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? I couldn't help but smile. It did sound nice. It'll be a lot of work, I warned him. And money. We'll have to tighten our belts for a while. Mike waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry about that. We'll make it work. I'll support us for the first year while you get things up and running. You just focus on making your dream come true. His words filled me with warmth. This was why I loved him, his unwavering support, his belief in me. Okay, I said, my mind already racing with plans. Let's do this. The next few months were a whirlwind. I quit my job at the clinic, throwing myself headfirst into preparations. There was so much to do, getting licenses, finding the right location, renovations, equipment. Every day brought new challenges, new decisions to make. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime of preparation, my office was ready. I stood in the doorway, taking in the gleaming equipment, the fresh paint smell, the neatly arranged waiting area. This was mine. All mine. As I locked up that first night, a mix of excitement and terror churned in my stomach. Tomorrow, I'd open my doors to my first patients. I was on my own now, sink or swim. The first few months of running my own dental practice were a whirlwind. I worked 7 days a week, from dawn till dusk, barely stopping to eat or sleep. My office became my second home, scratch that, my first home. I saw more of my dental chair than I did of my own bed. Dr. Thompson, your next patient is ready, my receptionist, Lisa, would say, poking her head into my office. I'd nod, gulping down the last of my cold coffee. Thanks, Lisa. Send them in. And so it went, day after day. Fillings, crowns, root canals, I did it all. When I wasn't with patients, I was buried in paperwork, learning the ins and outs of running a business. It was exhausting, but exhilarating too. This was my dream, after all. Mike and I became like ships passing in the night. When I left for work, he was still asleep. When I got home, he was already in bed. We communicated through hastily scribbled notes and brief text messages. How's work? I texted one day, during a rare quiet moment. Fine, came the reply, hours later. I frowned at my phone. That was it? Just fine? But before I could dwell on it, Lisa was calling me for another patient, and thoughts of Mike were pushed to the back of my mind. Weeks turned into months. I was so focused on my practice that I barely noticed the changing seasons. Spring became summer, summer faded into fall. I was making progress, slowly but surely. My patient list was growing, and I was starting to see some regulars. You're doing great, Dr. Thompson, Mr. Johnson, one of my first patients, said during a checkup. This place is really coming along. I beamed at him. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. That means a lot. But for every high, there was a low. The stress was constant, the pressure immense. There were nights I'd come home and cry, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But then I'd think of how far I'd come, how much I'd invested, and I'd pull myself together. I couldn't give up now. One particularly grueling day, I stumbled home well past midnight. The apartment was dark and quiet. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch, too tired to make it to the bedroom. That's when my phone rang. I groaned, fumbling for it in the dark. Who could be calling at this hour? Tessa, is that you? It was Mike's mother, Ellen, her voice tight with worry. I sat up, suddenly alert. Yes, it's me. What's wrong? I've been trying to reach Mike all day, Ellen said. He's not answering his phone. I'm worried sick. There's been some kind of scandal at his work. My heart dropped. Scandal? What scandal? I'm sorry, I don't know anything about this, I said, my mind racing. I haven't really talked to Mike in a while. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Oh, Mike's mother said, her voice small. I see. Well, if you hear from him, please ask him to call me. Of course, I promised. I'll talk to him as soon as I can. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, my exhaustion forgotten. What was going on with Mike? How could there be a scandal at his work that I knew nothing about? I found Mike in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. He looked up when I entered, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. We need to talk, I said, my voice sounding strangely calm, despite the turmoil inside me. Your mom called. She said there was some kind of scandal at your work. What's going on, Mike? He let out a long, shaky breath. I quit my job, Tessa. About a month ago. The words hit me like a physical blow. A month? You've been unemployed for a month and you didn't tell me? I didn't want to upset you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You've been so busy with the practice, I didn't want to add to your stress. I stood up, pacing the room as I tried to process this information. So what happened? Your mom mentioned a scandal. Mike ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was uncomfortable. I had a fight with my boss. He was being unreasonable, demanding more and more overtime without compensation. I stood up to him, things got heated, and I walked out. My pride wouldn't let me stay. I wanted to yell, to shake him, to demand why he thought his pride was more important than our financial stability. But looking at him, slumped and defeated, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I sat back down beside him. What are you going to do now? I asked softly. Mike shrugged. I don't know. I think I might be suffering from burnout. I've been thinking about seeing a psychologist, maybe taking a short break from work to figure things out. Part of me wanted to scream that we couldn't afford a break, that I was already working myself to the bone trying to keep my new practice afloat. But I swallowed those words. Mike needed support, not criticism. Okay, I said, taking his hand. If that's what you need, we'll make it work. But Mike, you have to promise me something. No more secrets. I need to know what's going on in your life, good or bad. Okay? Mike nodded, squeezing my hand. Okay, I promise. I'm sorry, Tessa. I should have told you sooner. The next day, I called the clinic where I used to work and asked if they had any part-time positions available. It was a step backward, but we needed the extra income. As I hung up the phone, having secured the part-time position, I looked at Mike. He was on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. I got the job, I said. I start next week. He just nodded in response, as if it was something that was taken for granted. The next few months were a blur of exhaustion and stress. I'd wake up at dawn, see patients at my office until early afternoon, then rush to the clinic for my part-time shift. By the time I got home each night, I was dead on my feet. Mike, true to his word, started seeing a psychologist. He talked about burnout and needing time to recuperate. I tried to be supportive, but it was hard not to feel resentful as I watched him lounging on the couch while I worked myself to the bone. One evening, about 3 months after Mike had quit his job, I came home to find him in an unusually good mood. Tessa, he exclaimed as I trudged through the door. I've got great news. I got a job. It's with that engineering firm downtown. I start next week. Relief washed over me. Finally, things were looking up. That's wonderful, Mike, I said, managing a tired smile. We should celebrate. And celebrate we did. I splurged on a bottle of wine, and for the first time in months, we sat down to a meal together, talking and laughing like we used to. It felt good, like maybe we were getting back on track. But my relief was short-lived. A month into his new job, Mike came home fuming. I quit, he announced, throwing his briefcase onto the couch. I froze, the plate I was washing slipping from my hands and clattering into the sink. What? Why? The boss is a tyrant, Mike spat. He wants complete control over everything. I'm not some puppet he can order around. So what now? I asked when he finally paused for breath. He shrugged. I'll find something else. Something better. A job where they appreciate my skills and give me the freedom I deserve. I wanted to scream. To shake him and ask if he appreciated my skills, if he understood the freedom I'd given up to keep us afloat. But I didn't. I just nodded, turned back to the dishes, and tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. The weeks that followed were tense. Mike spent his days at home, supposedly job hunting, while I continued my grueling schedule. But more and more often, I'd come home to find him playing video games or watching TV. Any luck with the job search? I'd ask. Nothing suitable yet, he'd reply, not looking away from the screen. These companies just don't get it. I need something challenging, you know? With good pay and flexible hours. Then one day, Mike started talking about having children. Wouldn't it be great to have a little one running around? He said over breakfast. I could stay home and take care of the kid while you work. It's the perfect solution. I stared at him, my coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips. Mike, we can barely afford our current lifestyle. How could we possibly support a child? He waved his hand dismissively. We'll figure it out. You're doing great with your practice, and I'll find something eventually. Come on, Tessa, don't you want to be a mom? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course I wanted children, someday. But not like this. Not when our marriage was hanging by a thread and our financial situation was so precarious. I think we need to focus on getting our lives in order first, I said carefully. Maybe when things are more stable. Mike's face fell. You just don't understand, he muttered. You're always so focused on work, you can't see what's really important. His words stung, but I didn't have the energy to argue. I just got up, rinsed my mug, and headed out to another long day of work. As the months dragged on, the tension in our household grew thicker. Mike's job search had become sporadic at best, and he spent more and more time immersed in his video games. I was exhausted, stressed, and increasingly resentful. One evening, I came home to find Mike excitedly setting up a new gaming console. What's this? I asked, my voice tight. He grinned, not noticing my tone. Just got the latest system. The graphics are incredible. I felt my temper flare. And how exactly did you pay for this? Mike's smile faltered. I took some money from our joint account. But don't worry, it's an investment in my hobby. Once I start working again, I'll pay it all back. The argument that followed was ugly. Months of pent-up frustration and resentment came pouring out. We said things we couldn't take back, reopened old wounds, and created new ones. From that day on, I stopped putting money into our joint account. I paid the bills myself and bought groceries as needed. Mike was furious, accusing me of not respecting him and infringing on his rights. I'm the man of this house, he yelled during one particularly heated argument. I should be managing our finances. I laughed bitterly. What finances, Mike? The money I earned that you spend on games and beer? The atmosphere at home became unbearable. We barely spoke, and when we did, it usually ended in an argument. I threw myself into my work even more, using it as an escape from the disaster my personal life had become. Then came the day that changed everything. I was at home, catching up on some paperwork, when I overheard Mike on the phone with his parents. His voice drifted from the bedroom, animated in a way I hadn't heard in months. "Yeah, I need a new business suit for this job interview," he was saying. "It's a great opportunity, but I'm a little short on cash right now. Could you maybe help me out?" I felt a spark of hope. Was Mike finally taking his job search seriously? But as I listened, that hope quickly turned to ash. "Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate it. I'll pay you back as soon as I get the job." The call ended, and I waited, expecting Mike to come share the news about his interview. But he didn't. Instead, I heard the familiar sounds of him booting up his computer. Curious and increasingly suspicious, I quietly made my way to the bedroom door. What I saw made my blood run cold. Mike was online, not browsing job listings, but purchasing a new computer game and ordering a case of beer for delivery. I couldn't believe my eyes. He had just lied to his parents, begged them for money under false pretenses, and now he was spending it on alcohol and games? "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, pushing the door open. Mike jumped, guilt flashing across his face, before quickly being replaced by defiance. "It's none of your business. This is my money." "Your money?" I was incredulous. "You just lied to your parents to get that money. They think you're buying a suit for a job interview." The argument that followed was the worst we'd ever had. Finally, red-faced and shaking with anger, Mike grabbed a bag and started throwing clothes into it. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice hoarse from yelling. "To my parents," he spat. "At least they support me." As the door slammed behind him, I sank to the floor, overwhelmed by a mix of anger, disappointment, and an odd sense of relief. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe. Days passed since Mike stormed out, and the apartment felt eerily quiet without him. On the fourth day, as I was finishing up with a patient, my phone buzzed. Mike's name flashed on the screen. My heart raced as I answered. "Hey, Tessa." Mike's voice was cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "I'm in Miami with my parents. Mom's always wanted to come here, so we decided to make a weekend of it." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "And how exactly are you paying for this trip?" There was a brief pause before Mike answered, his tone slightly less jovial. "Well, I had to borrow a couple of your credit cards. But don't worry. I'll pay you back many times over once I start this new job." I felt sick. "You took my credit cards without asking me?" "Come on, don't be like that," Mike said, his voice taking on that wheedling tone I'd grown to hate. "It's just for the weekend. I'll bring you back a nice shell from the beach, okay? Have a good weekend, honey." Before I could respond, he had hung up. In that moment, something inside me snapped. With shaking hands, I opened my banking app and blocked all my credit cards. Next, I called a locksmith. Within an hour, he was at my apartment, changing the locks. My final stop that day was a lawyer's office. I'd found her online, Sandra Patel, specializing in divorce law. "I want to file for divorce," I said, the words coming out easier than I'd expected. Sandra nodded, her expression compassionate but professional. "I understand, Dr. Thompson. We'll start the process right away. Can you tell me a bit more about your situation?" By the time I left her office, the divorce papers were being drawn up. As I stepped out onto the street, the late afternoon sun warming my face, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The sun had long set when my phone rang again. Mike's name flashed on the screen, and I braced myself as I answered. "Tessa? Thank God you picked up." Mike's voice was frantic. "Something's wrong with the credit cards. They're not working, and we can't pay for anything here. Mom and Dad are freaking out." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "That's because I blocked them, Mike. I didn't give you permission to use my cards." There was stunned silence for a moment before Mike spoke again. "Look, I'm sorry, okay?" His tone shifted to pleading. We're already here on the coast. Can't you just unblock the cards? We'll sort everything out when we get back, I promise. I almost laughed at the familiarity of those empty promises. No, Mike. I'm done sorting things out for you. You've put me in impossible situations time and time again. Now you can figure this one out on your own. Tessa, please. He was begging now. You're putting me in such an awkward position. My parents are here, we have no way to pay, this is your problem too. No, Mike, I said firmly. This is your problem. You created it, now you solve it. Goodbye. The next day, I took a personal day from work. I spent the morning packing up Mike's belongings, trying not to get caught up in memories as I boxed up his clothes, books, and the various gadgets he'd accumulated over the years. Once everything was packed, I called a storage facility and arranged for his things to be kept there. A few days later, I was at work when my phone buzzed with a call from Mike. I stepped out of my office to take it. Tessa? I'm outside the apartment, but my key isn't working. Did you change the locks? He sounded incredulous. Yes, I did, I replied calmly. Mike, I've sent divorce papers to your parents' address. You should be receiving them soon. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Divorce papers? Tessa, you can't be serious. We can work this out, we always do. Not this time, I said, surprised at how steady my voice was. I packed up your things and sent them to a storage facility. I'll text you the details. Tessa, please, he begged. Let's start over. I'll change, I promise. Just give me one more chance. I closed my eyes, memories of all the last chances flashing through my mind. No, Mike. It's over. I hope you find what you're looking for, but it won't be with me. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of emotions, sadness for the end of what we once had, relief that it was finally over, and a growing excitement for what the future might hold. For the first time in years, that future was entirely up to me. A few weeks after I'd sent Mike's belongings to storage, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. Tessa? It's Ellen, Mike's mother. I braced myself, expecting a tirade about ruining their Miami trip. But Ellen's voice was soft, almost apologetic. I owe you an apology, Tessa, she said, catching me off guard. I had no idea what Mike has been putting you through. As Ellen spoke, the pieces of Mike's past began to fall into place. She told me about Mike's first wife, how she'd left him due to his chronic irresponsibility. Ellen had hoped Mike had changed, that our marriage would be different. When we got back from Miami and I learned the truth, how he'd been lying to you, stealing your money, I was devastated, Ellen confessed. I kicked him out of the house. I couldn't enable his behavior anymore. I felt a wave of empathy for this woman who'd raised Mike, who'd hoped for the best for her son. It's not your fault, Ellen, I said softly. You didn't know. Still, I'm so sorry for what he's put you through, she replied. You didn't deserve any of it. After we hung up, I sat in silence, processing the conversation. It was oddly comforting to know that I wasn't alone in being disappointed by Mike. In the weeks that followed, Mike made several attempts to reconcile. He showed up at my office, flowers in hand, pleading for another chance. He waited outside my apartment, trying to catch me as I came home. Each time, I refused to engage. I knew now that he wouldn't change, that we'd end up in the same cycle if I let him back in. As time passed, I found myself settling into a new rhythm. Without Mike's expenses draining our accounts, I was able to focus fully on my practice. I left the part-time clinic job, pouring all my energy into my own office. I hired a marketing consultant, and soon my patient list was growing steadily. 6 months after filing for divorce, I hired 2 more dentists to help with the increased workload. It was a joy to see my little practice flourishing, to know that all my hard work was finally paying off. A year after Mike left, I made the final payment on my business loan. To celebrate, I booked a weekend trip to a nearby spa resort. something I'd always wanted to do but had never allowed myself to splurge on before. As I lounged by the pool, sipping a fruity cocktail, I marveled at how much my life had changed. Now, as I sit in my expanded office, looking over plans for a new wing to accommodate more specialists, I can't help but feel proud of how far I've come. The past 2 years have been a journey of self-discovery and growth. I've learned to value myself, to trust my instincts, and to never settle for less than I deserve. Who knows what the future might bring? For now, I'm content knowing that whatever comes next, I have the strength and wisdom to handle it. My story isn't over. In many ways, it feels like it's just beginning. My name is Erica, and I never thought I'd be caught up in a family drama that would change my life forever. At 29, I was living a pretty ordinary life in the city. For the past 5 years, I'd been working as a secretary at Global Tech, a big corporation downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills for my small rented apartment. Weekends were my escape. I'd throw myself into dance classes, losing myself in the rhythm and forgetting about the pile of paperwork waiting for me on Monday. It wasn't much, but it was my life, and I was content. Family, though? That was complicated. I had a younger sister, Emily, who'd always been the golden child. From the day she was born, our mother doted on her like she was made of spun sugar. Dad, well, he just fell in line with whatever Mom wanted. It was always Emily this and Emily that. I tried not to be bitter, but it was hard not to feel like a shadow in my own family. As years went by, the distance between us grew. Phone calls became less frequent, visits even more so. I'd see pictures on social media of family gatherings I wasn't invited to, Emily always front and center, beaming with our parents. It stung, but I told myself I was better off focusing on my own life. That's why I nearly dropped my phone when Mom's number flashed on my screen one Tuesday evening. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for whatever drama might be on the other end. "Erica, it's your mother," her voice crackled through the speaker. "Hi, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Is everything okay?" "Your father wants to see you," she said, cutting straight to the chase. "Can you come to the house this weekend?" "Saturday at 2 p.m. Don't be late." And with that, she hung up. I stared at my phone, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. What could be so important that Dad wanted to see me after all this time? Part of me wanted to ignore the invitation, to protect myself from inevitable disappointment. But curiosity won out. I'd go, if only to find out what was going on. As I stood outside my parents' expensive home that Saturday, I took a deep breath. The house looked the same as always, a monument to my parents' success and a reminder of the life I'd never quite fit into. I rang the doorbell, half expecting no one to answer, half hoping no one would. The door swung open, and there stood my mother, her face a mask of polite indifference. "You're here," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Everyone's in the living room." Seated in the plush living room were my father, looking pale and drawn, my sister Emily, and her husband, James. The atmosphere was tense, thick with unspoken words and hidden agendas. I perched on the edge of an armchair, feeling like an outsider in my own family home. Up close, I could see how ill Dad looked. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes seemed sunken. A chill ran down my spine as I realized this wasn't just a casual family gathering. "I've got something to tell you all," Dad continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. I'm terminally ill. The doctors say I don't have much time left." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gasped, tears springing to my eyes. Despite our strained relationship, I loved my father. The thought of losing him was unbearable. "Daddy," I choked out, reaching for his hand. He squeezed mine weakly, a sad smile on his face. Emily let out a dramatic sob, burying her face in her husband's shoulder. Mom sat stone-faced, her lips pressed into a thin line. I wondered how long they'd known, how long they'd kept this from me. "There's more," Dad said, his voice growing stronger. "I've made some decisions about my will." The room fell silent. Even Emily's sobs quieted as everyone leaned in, listening intently. "Mary," Dad said, looking at Mom, "you'll get the apartment in the city." Mom nodded curtly, as if this was expected. "Emily, the house will be yours." My sister's eyes lit up, a smile breaking through her tears. Then Dad turned to me, and I saw a determination in his eyes I'd never seen before. "Erica, I've decided to leave you my savings. All of it. $800,000. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. $800,000? It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. But more than that, it felt like acknowledgement, a way of making up for years of being overlooked. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, all hell broke loose. Emily jumped to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "Dad, that's not fair. Erica's barely even part of this family anymore. She doesn't deserve it," Mom hissed, glaring at me as if I'd somehow orchestrated this. "John, you need to exclude her from the will. Now." I sat there, stunned, as my mother and sister railed against me. And then Dad slammed his fist on the coffee table, the sound echoing through the room. "Enough," he roared, his face flushed with anger. "This is my decision, and I won't change it." Turning to Mom, his eyes blazing, he continued, "I've been under your influence for far too long, Mary. I've neglected Erica because of you, and it ends now." The room fell silent once more. I stared at my father, seeing him in a new light. For the first time in my life, he was standing up for me. Dad turned to me then, his anger melting into sorrow. "Erica, can you ever forgive me? I've been a terrible father to you." Tears streaming down my face, I moved to him, wrapping my arms around his frail frame. "I forgive you, Dad," I whispered. "I love you." We held each other for a long moment, years of hurt and misunderstanding flowing away. When we finally separated, Dad looked exhausted. "I need to rest now," he said, slowly getting to his feet. "Erica, thank you for coming." As Dad left the room, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Mom stepped forward, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "Listen here, Erica. You need to do the right thing and give up your share of the inheritance." "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I won't give it up. Dad wants me to have it, and I'm respecting his wishes." Emily's face contorted with rage. She stepped closer, her finger jabbing at my chest. "You'll regret this, Erica. Mark my words." Over the next 2 weeks, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from Mom and Emily. Each one demanded I give up the inheritance, their tone growing increasingly hostile and threatening. I ignored them all, focusing on work and my dance classes, trying to find some semblance of normalcy. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning, I got the call I'd been dreading. Dad had passed away in his sleep. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and somber faces. Mom and Emily put on a show of grief, wailing dramatically and clutching each other. I noticed Emily wearing an obscenely expensive necklace and bracelet set, the diamonds catching the light as she dabbed at her dry eyes. After the service, we gathered at the house. I watched in disgust as Emily made a show of removing her jewelry, tucking it into her purse with exaggerated care. As the last of the guests trickled out, I gathered my things, eager to escape. That's when all hell broke loose. "My jewelry!" Emily shrieked, her hands flying to her face in mock horror. "It's gone. Someone's stolen it." Mom's eyes locked onto me, her gaze accusing. Well. Isn't it convenient that the only person who's been here all day is the one who stands to gain so much? I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what was happening. They were setting me up. "You can't be serious," I sputtered. "I didn't take anything." Emily's husband stepped forward, his voice oozing false concern. "Then you won't mind showing us what's in your purse, right, Erica?" I clutched my bag tighter, my mind racing. I knew I was innocent, but something told me that wouldn't matter if I opened my purse. "No," I said firmly. "I don't have to prove anything to you." Emily's husband pulled out his phone. "Then you leave me no choice. I'm calling the police. As he dialed, I saw a triumphant smirk flash across Emily's face. In that moment, I realized just how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, as two officers entered the house. Emily immediately launched into a tearful account of her stolen jewelry, painting herself as the grieving daughter, victimized on the day of her father's funeral. "Officers," Emily's husband said, his voice dripping with false concern. "We have reason to believe Erica may have taken the jewelry. She's refusing to show us the contents of her purse." The older of the two officers turned to me, his face impassive. "Ma'am, would you mind opening your purse for us?" I felt trapped, knowing that whatever happened next would not end well for me. With shaking hands, I opened my purse. The officer looked inside, and his expression hardened. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us," he said, reaching into my purse and pulling out Emily's necklace and bracelet. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "This isn't possible," I stammered. "I didn't take these. I'm being set up." But my protests fell on deaf ears. Mom and Emily launched into a tirade, calling me a thief, a liar, hurling insults that cut deeper than any knife. As the officers led me out, I caught a glimpse of Emily's smug smile, hidden behind her hand as she pretended to sob. At the police station, I sat in a stark interrogation room, still in my funeral clothes, trying to make sense of what had happened. Hours passed, and then the door opened. To my surprise, it was my mother who walked in, not a police officer. She dismissed the officer standing guard, insisting on speaking to me alone. As soon as the door closed behind her, Mom's demeanor changed entirely. Gone was the grieving widow, replaced by a cold, calculating woman I barely recognized. "Listen carefully, Erica," she hissed, leaning close. "You have one chance to fix this mess. Give up the inheritance. Sign it over to Emily, and all of this goes away. The charges, the scandal, everything." I stared at her, disbelief warring with a growing sense of betrayal. You set me up? Your own daughter?" Mom's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Oh, please. You stopped being part of this family long ago. Now, you have a choice. Give up the money, or we'll make sure you go to prison. Think about it, Erica. A thief who stole from her own sister at their father's funeral? Your reputation will be ruined. You'll lose everything." I felt sick to my stomach, the full weight of their betrayal crashing down on me. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I won't do it. I didn't steal anything, and I won't let you blackmail me." Mom's eyes flashed with anger. "You ungrateful little rat," she spat. "I hope you enjoy prison. Everyone will know what you did, stealing from your own family. You'll be nothing but a criminal, a disgrace." With that, she turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. I sat there, stunned, tears streaming down my face as the reality of my situation sank in. I was released on bail later that night, stumbling out of the police station into the cool night air. My phone buzzed, a message from my boss at Global Tech. My stomach dropped as I read it. "Erica, I've heard some disturbing rumors. Until the situation is resolved, I think it's best you take some time off. Paid leave, of course. I believe in your innocence, but we need to protect the company's reputation. Take care." I leaned against the cold brick wall of the station, feeling my world crumbling around me. In the span of a day, I'd lost my father, been betrayed by my family, arrested, and now I was on the verge of losing my job. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. With trembling fingers, I searched online for private investigators in the area. One name stood out, Jack Reeves, a former police detective turned PI with a reputation for solving complex cases. I made the call, my voice steadier than I expected as I explained my situation. "Ms. Thompson," Jack said after I finished my story, "this is a delicate situation. Family conspiracies are never easy to prove. But if what you're saying is true, we'll find evidence. It won't be cheap, though." I thought of the inheritance I was fighting for. "Money's not an issue. I need to clear my name and expose what they've done. The next 3 weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings with Jack, anxious waiting, and sleepless nights. I threw myself into my dance classes on weekends, desperate for any distraction from the constant worry. My phone remained silent, no calls from work, no more threats from my family. The silence was almost worse than the conflict. Then, one rainy afternoon, my phone rang. It was Jack. "Erica," he said, his voice grave. "I've got news, but you're not going to like it." My heart sank. "What is it, Jack?" He sighed heavily. "I've been following your mother and sister, trying to catch them discussing the inheritance or the theft. But they're careful, too careful. They never talk about it in public, and I can't legally bug their homes." I felt the last glimmer of hope fading. "So that's it? There's nothing we can do?" "Not exactly," Jack replied, a note of hesitation in his voice. "I did find something, but it's not related to your case. It's about your sister." I sat up straighter. "What about her?" "She's having an affair, Erica. I have photographic evidence of her entering a hotel with a young man, definitely not her husband. I also managed to record some of their conversations. It's not flattering to her husband, to say the least." For a moment, I sat in stunned silence. Then, slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. "Jack," I said, my voice low and determined, "I need you to send me everything you have on this. And I mean everything." As soon as I hung up, I sprang into action. I spent the next hour poring over the photos and recordings Jack sent, my mind racing with possibilities. Finally, I made a decision. I selected the most damning photo, my sister entering the hotel with her young lover, and sent it to her husband's phone with a simple message. "Interested in knowing what happened next? Meet me at Café Luna tomorrow at 2 p.m. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, my nerves on edge. At exactly 2 p.m., Emily's husband walked in, his face a mask of barely contained fury and curiosity. "What's this about, Erica?" he demanded as he sat down across from me. I took a deep breath. "I think you know, James. But what you've seen is just the tip of the iceberg." Over the next hour, I laid out everything I had. The photos, the recordings of Emily laughing about James's age, mocking his performance in bed, discussing her plans to leave him once she got her hands on the full inheritance. James sat in stunned silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, he looked up at me, his eyes blazing with a mixture of pain and rage. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I leaned forward. "I want justice, James. And I think you do too. Help me prove that they framed me, and we can both get what we deserve." A few days after my meeting with James, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from him, containing several audio files. My heart raced as I pressed play on the first one. Emily's voice filled the air. "Can you believe how easy it was to plant that jewelry in Erica's purse?" My mother's laughter followed. "I know. The look on her face when the police found it was priceless. Well, she'll have no choice but to give it up now." I listened to file after file, each one filled with their callous plotting and cruel laughter. A mix of vindication and disgust washed over me. Finally, I had the proof I needed. The day of the will reading arrived quickly. I entered the notary's office, my stomach in knots, but my resolve firm. Mom and Emily were already there, shooting me smug looks. James sat quietly in the corner, giving me an almost imperceptible nod. The notary, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Let's begin," he said, unfolding the document before him. He read through the will, detailing the distribution of assets, just as Dad had explained that day at the house. As he finished, I stood up. "If I may," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "there's something I need to address before we conclude." Mom's eyes lit up, and she nodded approvingly. "I'm glad you've finally come to your senses, Erica. I knew you'd make the right decision and give up the inheritance." Mom and Emily exchanged triumphant glances, their faces beaming with anticipation. but I was about to disappoint them. "I'm afraid you've misunderstood," I said, pulling out my phone. "I think you'll all want to hear this." I pressed play, and the room filled with their voices, gleefully discussing how they had framed me for theft. As the recording played, I watched the color drain from their faces. Emily let out a strangled gasp, while Mom sat rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. When it ended, chaos erupted. "You lying scum!" Emily screeched, lunging towards me. "How dare you!" Mom hissed, her composure cracking. "You ungrateful, scheming." I recorded those conversations. James suddenly spoke up, his voice cutting through the commotion. The room descended into madness. Emily was screaming at James, Mom was hurling insults at me, and I stood there, watching it all unfold. "Silence!" The notary's voice boomed, startling us all into quiet. "This is a legal proceeding, not a circus. Everyone will calm down this instant, or I'll have you all removed." As the notary's words echoed through the room, a heavy silence fell. It was broken by James, who stood up abruptly, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Since we're airing dirty laundry," he said, his voice trembling with anger, "I have something to add." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, slapping it down on the table in front of Emily. Emily's face drained of color as she stared at the image. It showed her entering a hotel with a man who was decidedly not her husband. "I know everything, Emily," James spat. "Your affair, your lies, all of it. I'm filing for divorce, and thanks to our prenup, you won't see a penny. You'll be paying me compensation for your infidelity." Emily's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, no words coming out. Mom looked between Emily and James, her expression a mix of shock and dawning horror as she realized their carefully constructed world was crumbling around them. Suddenly, the door to the notary's office swung open. 2 police officers walked in, their faces stern. "Mary and Emily Thompson," one of them asked, though it was clear he already knew who they were. Mom and Emily looked up, tears streaking their faces. "You're under arrest for false accusations of theft and attempted blackmail," the officer continued. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the police read them their rights and handcuffed them, I watched with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was justice, but it was also the final nail in the coffin of our family relationship. I walked out of the office behind the police, watching as they put Mom and Emily into separate patrol cars. As the sirens faded into the distance, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Taking out my phone, I dialed a familiar number. "Erica," my boss's voice came through, sounding concerned. "Is everything all right?" "Better than all right," I replied, a smile in my voice. "I can explain everything now. The accusations against me were false, and I have proof." I gave him a brief rundown of what had happened. As I finished, I heard him let out a low whistle. "Erica, I'm so sorry you had to go through all that," he said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "But I'm glad the truth came out. Listen, your job is still here whenever you're ready to come back. In fact, I'd be delighted to see you at work as soon as you feel up to it." The weeks following the confrontation at the notary's office were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and life-changing decisions. As the truth came to light, the charges against me were quickly dropped. The relief I felt was indescribable, like a weight I'd been carrying for months suddenly lifted from my shoulders. But for Mom and Emily, the nightmare was just beginning. They faced charges of false accusation and attempted blackmail. The trial was swift and damning, with the recorded evidence leaving no room for doubt. In the end, they were found guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern-faced woman with piercing eyes, looked down at them from her bench. In addition to the criminal penalties, this court orders Mary and Emily Thompson to pay substantial damages to Erica Thompson for emotional distress and damage to her reputation. The fine was staggering. Mom's face went pale as the amount was read out, while Emily burst into tears. In the days that followed, I watched from a distance as their lives unraveled. Mom, with no other choice, was forced to sell the apartment Dad had left her. It was a beautiful place in the heart of the city, but now it slipped from her grasp, the proceeds going straight to me as part of the damages. Emily's situation was even more dire. The house she'd been so smug about inheriting had to be sold to cover her part of the fine. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as I remembered her gloating face the day Dad announced his will. But Emily's troubles didn't end there. James, true to his word, filed for divorce. He demanded the compensation outlined in their prenuptial agreement for her infidelity. What little money was left from the sale of the house went straight to him. In the span of a few short months, Mom and Emily had lost everything. Their comfortable lives, their social standing, their financial security, all of it gone. They were left with nothing but the consequences of their own actions. As for me, I found myself in a position I'd never dreamed possible. With the inheritance from Dad and the damages from Mom and Emily, I had more money than I knew what to do with. After much thought, I decided to buy a beautiful apartment in a quiet part of town. It was everything I'd ever wanted in a home, spacious, bright, and most importantly, mine. The rest of the money, I invested carefully. I spent hours researching, consulting with financial advisors, and making prudent decisions. My goal was to ensure a steady income for years to come, to build the security that I'd always longed for. As I stood in my new apartment, looking out over the city skyline, I couldn't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that had brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for justice, it had all led to this moment. I thought of Mom and Emily, now struggling to make ends meet. Part of me felt sorry for them, but a larger part knew that they were facing the consequences of their own choices. They had tried to take everything from me, and in the end, they'd lost it all themselves. My phone buzzed with a message from my boss, confirming my return to work next week. I smiled, looking forward to getting back to normal, or rather, my new normal.